The bidding had already climbed to $8,000, high enough that everyone in the auction hangar understood what it meant for the dog. When Scarlett Waverly stepped through the rope barrier and held up a single brass challenge coin. What happened in the next 3 minutes would silence 200 men, stop a 78-pound Belgian Malinois mid-snarl, and make a retired combat officer cry for the first time since Kandahar. Chief Petty Officer Hugh Waverly had spent 11 years as a Navy SEAL before anyone thought to describe him in terms other than a problem solver. He was the kind of man who fixed a convoy's blown engine with a field knife and a strip of comms wire, who could navigate a mountain range in blackout conditions using dead reckoning and sheer bloody-mindedness. He was also, according to his daughter Scarlett, absolutely terrible at birthdays. Every year without fail, Hugh would call from whatever forward operating base he was stationed at, 3 days late, voice crackling through a satellite connection, and say, "Happy birthday, Scar. I owe you one." By the time Scarlett turned 22, she had a running tally of 12 missed birthdays. She kept the list on a post-it note stuck to her bathroom mirror. Not out of bitterness, she would be the first to tell you that, but because she planned to collect them all at once someday, somewhere warm, with bad umbrella drinks and a beach. That day never came. What did come, eventually and inevitably, was Bolt. Hugh had been partnered with the Belgian Malinois for 2.5 years before his final deployment. Bolt was a 4-year-old dual-purpose K9, explosive detection and apprehension, and he weighed 78 pounds of dense, coiled muscle. He had completed 3 combat tours before being paired with Hugh, and he wore the invisible marks of every one of them. A slight hesitation on the left haunch where shrapnel had grazed him years prior, a particular alertness in his amber eyes that never fully switched off, even during downtime. But with Hugh, Bolt was different. Scarlett had visited the base in Coronado twice during her father's last shore rotation, and both times she watched the way the dog tracked Hugh's every movement. Not with the anxious vigilance of a working animal, but with something quieter and more deliberate, like a compass needle finding north. When Hugh sat down, Bolt sat against his leg. When Hugh laughed, the dog's tail moved in slow, satisfied arcs. When Scarlett teased her father about it, "You two been going to couples therapy, Dad?" Hugh had just looked at the dog for a moment and said quietly, "He kept me from making a bad call in Mosul last year. I don't take that lightly." Scarlett hadn't pressed him on it. She'd learned early not to press Hugh on operational things. What she did do was reach down and scratch Bolt behind the ear, and the dog leaned into her hand with an almost embarrassing level of trust, and she thought, "Okay, I understand now." That was 9 months before the mountains. The details of what happened in northern Syria were classified and remained classified. What Scarlett was told, in a beige government office with fluorescent lighting and a box of tissues she didn't touch, was that Chief Petty Officer Hugh Waverly had been killed in action. What she learned later, from 2 of Hugh's teammates who drove down to San Diego on a Tuesday without calling first and sat at her kitchen table for 4 hours, was something closer to the truth. Their patrol had been hit in a narrow gorge, vehicles blocked front and rear. 3 men wounded in the first pass. Hugh had moved to a forward position to lay suppressing fire and keep the exfil route clear while the injured were loaded onto the extraction vehicle. Bolt had been with him, detecting a pressure plate device hidden along the southern slope that would have sealed off their only exit. When a second element came in from the east, Bolt engaged them, taking a fragmentation hit to his left flank. Hugh held the line for 11 minutes. 11 minutes, his teammates said, not looking at Scarlett when they said it, long enough for everyone else to get out. He did not get out. Bolt was brought back on the exfil vehicle, physically restrained from the cargo bay where Hugh's equipment was being transported. He was sedated twice during the flight to Ramstein. When Scarlett heard this, sitting at her own kitchen table, in the apartment 3 blocks from the hospital where she worked 12-hour shifts in the emergency department. She didn't cry. She set her hands flat on the table and breathed through it the way Hugh had taught her to breathe through hard things. Slow and deliberate, like you mean it. Then she asked about the dog. The paperwork to adopt a deceased handler's military working dog was, in theory, straightforward. In practice, it was not. The Naval Special Warfare Command's Behavioral Assessment Unit had classified Bolt as a Level 4 aggression risk, following a 30-day evaluation at the kennels in Little Creek. He had stopped eating consistently. He'd bitten a kennel technician badly enough to require stitches. He'd destroyed 2 reinforced crate doors. When a male handler in full kit approached his enclosure, he would run at the chain link with enough force to buckle the lower panel. The evaluation report, which Scarlett received via a form letter that began with the phrase, "We regret to inform you," concluded that Bolt was not a suitable candidate for civilian adoption or family placement. Too much trauma, too little stability, a liability. Scarlett read the letter on a Sunday morning, with coffee going cold beside her. Then she filed a formal appeal. Then she called the base JAG office. Then she called her congressman's district office, where a junior staffer told her politely that MWD adoption disputes were outside the scope of legislative intervention. Then the second letter arrived. Due to Bolt's specialized training, his multi-discipline certification, and the assessed value of his preparation, the Naval Special Warfare Command had determined the dog would be transferred via official DUD surplus property auction to a qualified private entity. The auction was scheduled for the second Saturday of the following month at Naval Air Station, North Island, San Diego. A private security firm out of Scottsdale had already pre-registered. Scarlett put the letter down. She went to her closet and took out the cedar box where she kept the things that mattered. Inside, beneath photographs and a folded flag, was the challenge coin Hugh had pressed into her palm the last time she'd seen him at the airport. Matte brass, heavier than it looked. On one face, the seal trident. On the other, worn nearly smooth from years of turning in Hugh's pocket, the number 11. She held it for a long time. Then she got in her car. The auction was held in a logistics hangar on the eastern end of the airfield, a corrugated steel structure that smelled of aviation fuel and industrial cleaner. The morning air off the Pacific was cold and sharp, the kind of cold that cut through a jacket and reminded you the ocean didn't care how you felt about it. Scarlett arrived 40 minutes early, wearing Hugh's old CPO ball cap and a grey fleece with no markings on it. She hadn't registered to bid. She didn't have the licensing or the handling infrastructure the registration required. She had driven to the base because she hadn't been able to think of anywhere else to go. The registered bidders moved through the space in clusters. Law enforcement procurement officers, private security representatives in tactical casual attire. A base commander named Colonel Aldrin Red, who stood near the back with his arms folded and the expression of a man performing a bureaucratic function he'd rather be finished with. Along the north wall, a row of 8 reinforced transport kennels held the military working dogs awaiting disposition. They were making noise, the layered, overlapping noise of stressed animals reading a stressful room wrong, pacing, barking, throwing their weight against the cage doors. All except one. Bolt was in the 3rd crate from the left. He was not pacing. He was sitting in the back corner of the kennel, perfectly still, his amber eyes fixed on the middle distance, radiating the particular stillness of an animal that has decided to stop trying to make sense of the world around it. He'd lost weight. His coat, once dense and structured, looked dull, compressed, like something had gone out underneath it. Scarlett stood in front of his kennel for 2 minutes before she sat down on the concrete floor. She didn't speak, she just sat. Bolt's eyes moved to her, not aggressively. not with the flat, feral attention he'd been training on the kennel handlers. Just recognition of a variable, a thing that was different from the other things in the room. She pulled the challenge coin out of her jacket pocket and turned it between her fingers, the way Hugh used to do. Something shifted in the dog's posture, barely perceptible. His ears moved forward a fraction of an inch. A handler in base utilities appeared at her shoulder. "Ma'am, you need to step back from the kennels. The animals aren't cleared for public contact." Scarlett stood up. She put the coin back in her pocket. The auction started at 9. The auctioneer was a compact, efficient man named Bo Stanton, who moved through the early lots, surplus vehicles, decommissioned equipment, 4 patrol dogs with routine profiles, at a pace suggesting he had a flight to catch. The room settled into the rhythm of it, the practiced cadence of men bidding on things with their hands in their pockets. Then came Bolt. 2 handlers brought him out on a short leash and a secondary catch pole, working in practiced tandem. Bolt had a heavy frame muzzle on, and his ears were flat against his skull. His body was low, not submissive, ready. The moment he entered the main floor, the other 7 dogs in their kennels went wild. Bo Stanton spoke into his mic over the noise. Lot 14, Belgian Malinois, male, 6 years, dual purpose, explosive detection and apprehension trained, 3 combat deployments currently assessed, level 4 aggression following handler loss. He'll require significant retraining, starting bid $3,000. A man in the 3rd row raised a placard. Aldous Cray, Regional Acquisitions Director for a firm called Sentinel Ridge, which specialized in high-asset protection contracts in the Gulf. He was wearing a sport coat over a black turtleneck and had the particular ease of a man accustomed to getting what he came for. $3,000, Stanton confirmed. $5,000, said a police procurement officer near the side wall, half-heartedly. Cray raised his placard without looking up from his phone. $8,000. The police officer declined. A 3rd bidder pushed briefly to $8,500, then dropped out. $8,500 going to. Scarlett Waverly stepped through the rope barrier onto the active auction floor. Later, people who were there would describe it differently. The base communications officer said she walked onto the floor calmly. One of the contracted security reps said she looked like she'd made a decision 3 days ago and was only now getting around to acting on it. A kennel handler named Toby, who'd been working the catch pole on Bolt's right side, said she walked like someone who'd run out of patience with how the story was going and decided to rewrite the ending herself. She stopped 8 feet from where Bolt was being held. The handlers tensed. Stanton lowered the gavel. Cray finally looked up from his phone. Bolt lunged. Not at Scarlett. He lunged sideways, a full-body violent surge that made both handlers brace and stumble, and then he stopped, mid-motion. His body went rigid. Because Scarlett had reached into her jacket pocket and taken out the challenge coin. She wasn't holding it up for show. She was just turning it in her fingers the way Hugh always did, absently, automatically, the small habitual motion of a man who needed something to do with his hands during high-stress situations. 11 years of deployment rotations. 11 years of Hugh turning that core coin during briefings. Before jumps, in the dark hours before a mission went kinetic. The coin had been in Hugh's pocket the day he died. It still carried traces of him, the particular combination of gun oil and institutional soap, and something underneath that was just Hugh, a biochemical signature embedded in the brass long after the man himself was gone. Bolt's nose went up. His amber eyes locked onto Scarlett. The growling stopped so abruptly that the absence of sound was louder than the noise had been. Every person in the hangar heard it, the cessation, the sudden, absolute quiet from the 78-pound animal that had been assessed as unmanageable, dangerous, unsuitable for anything except a controlled professional environment. Bolt took one step toward Scarlett, then another. The handlers held the lines taut, confused and cautious. The dog wasn't lunging, he wasn't snarling. He was moving, deliberately, carefully, the way he used to walk at heel when Hugh gave him the stand-down signal after a training exercise. Toward the woman who smelled like the man he'd been looking for since the mountains of Syria. Scarlett held her ground. She did not move toward him. She let him come. When the distance was down to 3 feet, Bolt stopped. He lowered his head until his muzzled snout was level with her jacket pocket. He stood there, chest heaving, and made a sound that was not a growl and not a whine, but something in the exact middle, a sound no one in that hangar had a word for. Then he lay down. Flat out, belly on the concrete, chin touching the floor, the way he'd lain at Hugh's feet during stand-down. His eyes stayed on Scarlett. Along the north wall, the 7 dogs in the transport kennels went quiet. Not one by one all at once. The pacing stopped. The barking stopped. In the space of 3 seconds, 7 military working dogs, each trained, each damaged, each running on a stew of stress and confinement, sat up in their crates, chests out, ears forward, bodies turned toward the center of the hangar, not toward the auctioneer, not toward the registered bidders, toward Scarlett Waverly, standing alone on the auction floor in her dead father's ball cap, holding a brass coin in her fingers. Bo Stanton's gavel hung in the air. He did not bring it down. Cray set his phone on the seat beside him. Colonel Red uncrossed his arms. In the silence, Scarlett reached into her jacket pocket and extended her bid. Not money, not a numbered placard, the challenge coin held flat on her open palm toward the auctioneer. "My father's team token," she said, loud enough to carry through the stillness. "SEAL Team 5. He carried it for 11 years. He was Bolt's handler. His name was Chief Petty Officer Hugh Waverly, and that dog spent 3 deployments keeping my father alive until the one that killed him." She paused once and her voice did not break. "I know what the evaluation says. I'm not here to dispute the evaluation. I'm here because Bolt is what's left of my father's service, and I'm asking everyone in this room to let that mean something." Red was already moving. The colonel crossed the floor with the purposeful stride of a man who'd made decisions under worse pressure and would make this one quickly. He stepped up beside Stanton, spoke low and direct into the man's ear. Stanton frowned, looked at his legal pad, looked back. "Colonel, the lot is underactive. Suspend it, not loudly, not angrily, the way a man speaks when the thing he's saying is already decided." Cray stood up. "I have a binding registered bid on this lot, Colonel." His voice was level and precise. "I have counsel on retainer who would be very interested in a unilateral suspension of a DOD-compliant auction proceeding." He was making a factual statement about power and consequence, the way men like Aldous Cray always did. The room held its breath. And then Aldous Cray did something that surprised everyone in it, including himself. He picked up his sport coat from the back of the chair. He made a short phone call, standing in the center of the aisle, his voice lower than anyone had heard it. Then he came forward onto the floor. He stopped in front of Scarlett. "I was in Kandahar province in 2013, he said quietly. "My company lost 3 men and 2 vehicles in a gorge ambush outside Arghandab. We were pinned for 35 minutes until a SEAL element broke the contact from the southern flank." He looked at the dog lying flat on the concrete. "When this lot came up, I ran the K9 element attached to that SEAL rotation. Bolt was on scene. His handler's name is in the after-action report." He met Scarlett's eyes. "I didn't know who Hugh Waverly was. I never got to know. But I've been walking around free for 12 years because someone decided to hold a line." He turned to Stanton. "Sentinel Ridge withdraws its bid on Lot 14. Transfer processing goes to the family. I'll cover the administrative fees." Stanton looked at Colonel Red. Red gave a single nod. What moved through the gathered men was not exactly cheering. It was something more like release. The collective exhale of a room that had been holding something tightly and could finally put it down. Bolt was still lying flat on the floor when Scarlett knelt beside him and put her hand against the side of his muzzled face. The dog pressed his whole head into the contact. A long, shuddering breath moved through his body, traveling from chest to hindquarters, and then he was still. The recovery was not fast and not clean. Scarlett had taken a sublet in a ground-floor apartment specifically for its yard, and for the first 3 weeks, Bolt refused to use it. He would stand at the sliding glass door and look out at the open space with the expression of an animal that no longer trusted anything without a perimeter. He slept in 4-hour intervals, snapping awake at random sounds: a neighbor's car door, a marine layer rolling in off the coast, the baseline ambient noise of a city that didn't know how to be quiet enough for a dog trained to listen for the specific silence that preceded violence. Scarlett learned his rhythms. She worked night shifts 3 days a week and spent her off days at home, not forcing contact, not trying to accelerate anything. She understood from 11 years of watching Hugh reintegrate between deployments that the body comes home before the mind does, that what you're waiting for isn't healing, it's trust. Trust that the absence of threat is real and sustainable. She started by simply sitting in the yard. Not calling him, not coaxing, just sitting cross-legged on the concrete with a cup of coffee and a book she wasn't really reading, existing in the space he was afraid of until the space became familiar because she was in it. On the 14th day, Bolt walked through the sliding door and sat 3 feet from her. He didn't look at her. He looked at the fence line. Scarlett didn't look at him either. She turned a page she hadn't read. They sat like that for an hour. On the 21st day, he slept through a coastal thunderstorm that rattled the windows hard enough to wake Scarlett out of a dead sleep. She lay in the dark, listening to the thunder roll across the bay, and watched the shape of the dog at the foot of her bed, motionless and steady. She reached down and put her hand on his back. He sighed. After that, things moved differently. The hypervigilance didn't disappear, but it changed character. It became protective rather than reactive, oriented outward, scanning for threats to Scarlett, rather than replaying the ones that lived in his nervous system. He started walking with her in the mornings along the Embarcadero, still reading every person and vehicle they passed, but doing it the way a working animal does, purposefully, with a handler beside him, with a job. Her neighbors learned not to approach Scarlett on the street without announcing themselves from a reasonable distance. She never had to explain why. 6 months after the auction, on the anniversary of Hugh's death, Scarlett drove north to the cemetery in Riverside where her father was buried. It was a Tuesday morning, cool and overcast, the marine layer sitting grey and low. She had called ahead and received permission to bring Bolt onto the grounds given his service history and what the base veterinary officer had formally noted in writing as a markedly improved behavioral profile. He rode in the back seat without complaint. He watched the highway pass. When they arrived and Scarlett opened the door, Bolt stepped out and immediately oriented himself, nose up, reading the air. The cemetery was quiet. A few groundskeepers at the far end, the low-frequency hum of the city just over the ridgeline. He stayed close to Scarlett's left side as they walked through the rows. Hugh's section was in the eastern quarter under a cluster of eucalyptus trees. Scarlett knew the path by now. She had walked it 4 times since the burial. Bolt did not follow her toward Hugh's grave. 30 feet from the turn, he stopped. His ears came forward. His body dropped into the purposeful low crouch of active detection work, and then he moved. Not erratically, not anxiously, but with the same directional certainty he'd used in the field. He moved north along the row, past 3 headstones, turned left into the next row, walked 17 paces, and stopped. Scarlett followed. She looked at the headstone he was sitting in front of. Petty Officer 2nd Class Jerome Alston, United States Navy, died of wounds received in combat. The date on the stone was 9 days after the date of Hugh's death. Scarlett stood very still. She knew the name. She had read it once, in the declassified portion of the incident report she'd requested through the Casualty Affairs Office. Jerome Alston had been one of the wounded men in the gorge, one of the men Hugh had covered while they were loaded onto the extraction vehicle. He'd been evacuated. He'd been treated at Ramstein. He had died 9 days later from a secondary infection. He was buried 2 rows north of Hugh and 17 paces east. Bolt sat in front of the stone and raised his right paw and placed it gently at the base of the marble. He held that position for 30 seconds. Then he stood, turned, walked the 2 rows and 17 paces back to where Hugh lay and settled in the grass at the base of the headstone. He did not howl, he did not whine. He settled the way he used to settle at Hugh's feet in the briefing room. Chin on the grass, eyes forward, his breathing slow and even in the quiet of the morning. His body carried the ease of an animal that has found the place it was supposed to be. Scarlett sat down beside him. She turned the challenge coin in her fingers, the trident on one face, the number 11 worn nearly smooth on the other. She thought about 12 missed birthdays. She thought about a man who fixed broken things with whatever was at hand and never made a fuss about it. She thought about a dog that had navigated a cemetery he'd never visited to find every person his handler had loved, fought beside, and in the end given everything to protect. Around them, the eucalyptus moved in the marine air. The city hummed somewhere past the ridgeline. The morning stayed grey and cool and unhurried, the kind of morning that has the decency to leave you alone with what you need to carry. Scarlett leaned her shoulder against Bolt's side. He pressed back. Hugh Waverly had kept that coin, not because he thought it was lucky, but because it was proof. Proof that somewhere someone had been paying attention, that what he did had mattered, that it had been seen. Bolt had brought her here to say the same thing. Some losses are too large to be repaid. Some of them can only be carried forward, held close in a jacket pocket or in the measured breath of a dog who remembers everything and has chosen, against all probability, to stay. The morning held them both, and that was enough.